How did a gang of criminals rob one of the most secure banks in California without leaving a single clue? In the heart of California, there's a gang unlike any other. At its center is a man known only by the name Ghost. He's not just another criminal. He's a genius, a planner, someone who thrives on outsmarting the system. For months, Ghost had been quietly assembling a team. But this wasn't just any team. He picked the best. A hacker who could break into anything, a driver who never missed a turn, a demolitions expert who could blow open the unbreakable, and a master of disguise who could blend in anywhere. Each one had a reputation. Each one had a story. And now they had a mission. The target? One of the biggest banks in California. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the challenge. Ghost wanted to prove something, that no system was perfect, no lock unbreakable, and no law enforcer smart enough to catch him. The planning began. They studied the bank's layout, learned guard schedules, memorized every camera angle, and practiced every move like a military operation. They left nothing to chance. Ghost made one thing clear to his team. Failure wasn't an option. Every detail had to be flawless. They had to get in, get the cash, and disappear without leaving a trace. And the way they planned it? It seemed impossible to fail. The date was set. The team was ready. This wasn't going to be just another robbery. It was going to be a statement, a crime so perfect that it would leave the police and the entire city in shock. And when the night finally came, they were ready to make their move. The question wasn't if they could do it. It was if anyone could stop them. Ghost wasn't your average criminal. He didn't just dream about pulling off the perfect heist. He planned it down to the last second. But he knew one thing. Even the best plans fail without the right people. That's why he decided to form a team of specialists who were the best at what they did. This wasn't about loyalty or friendship. It was about skill. If you couldn't keep up, you weren't welcome. The first recruit was Ace, a hacker who had been breaking into systems since he was a teenager. Ace wasn't your typical computer geek. He was confident, cocky even, because he knew no firewall could keep him out. Ghost found him working out of a dingy apartment, surrounded by monitors, each screen glowing with lines of code. It didn't take much convincing. The challenge alone was enough to get Ace on board. Next came Mia, the getaway driver. Mia was a legend on the streets, known for her lightning-fast reflexes and ability to lose a tail in seconds. She wasn't interested in petty jobs, though. When Ghost approached her, she made it clear. She only worked on high-stakes gigs. "If you want me, you better have a plan that's worth my time," she'd said. Ghost's plan wasn't just worth her time, it was worth the risk. Then there was Tank, the demolitions expert. Tank was the kind of guy you'd cross the street to avoid. Big, intimidating, and with a reputation for making things go boom. Ghost found him in a rundown bar, nursing a drink. Tank didn't care about money as much as he cared about the thrill. The bigger the explosion, the better. When Ghost told him the target, Tank's eyes lit up. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. The last piece of the puzzle was Zoe, the master of disguise. Zoe was the wild card. She could be anyone she wanted to be, a guard, a customer, even a police officer. She had a way of blending in so seamlessly that people wouldn't even remember her face. Ghost knew she'd be the key to getting them inside the bank without raising suspicion. When he met her, Zoe asked just one question. "What's the payout?" When she heard the number, she smirked. "When do we start?" With the team assembled, Ghost laid out the plan. They didn't just sit around talking about what they were going to do, they practiced. They studied blueprints, memorized guard schedules, and ran drills until every move felt like second nature. Ghost's leadership was strict, almost military-like. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Everyone had a role, and they had to play it perfectly. Ace worked on hacking the bank's security system, ensuring the alarms wouldn't alert anyone until it was too late. Mia memorized every escape route in the city, planning multiple ways out depending on how things played out. Tank prepared the tools they'd need to crack open the vault, testing explosives that were powerful enough to do the job, but subtle enough not to draw too much attention. Zoe practiced her role, slipping in and out of character as if flipping a switch. And Ghost, he oversaw everything. He didn't just want the job done, he wanted it done perfectly. He ran simulations in his head, thinking of every possible way things could go wrong and coming up with solutions before they even became problems. The team was ready. The date was set. Ghost looked at his crew, a mix of brilliance and chaos, and for the first time he smiled. "This is it," he said. "We're going to make history." They weren't just planning a heist. They were planning perfection. No mistakes, no witnesses, no trail. They weren't just a gang. They were a machine, each part working flawlessly in sync. And when the night of the robbery came, they were ready to show the world what they were capable of. Ghost didn't believe in luck. For him, the success of a heist wasn't about chance. It was about preparation. And for this job, preparation was everything. The target was one of the biggest banks in California, with state-of-the-art security, motion sensors, and guards who never missed a step. This wasn't just another robbery. It was a test of their skills, their patience, and their ability to work as a team. Failure wasn't an option. The planning started with Ace, the hacker. His job was to dismantle the bank's digital defenses. He spent weeks studying their systems, diving into the darkest corners of the internet to gather intel on how their security software worked. Ace found weaknesses others missed, tiny cracks in the system that he could exploit. "It's like a fortress," he admitted, "but every fortress has a weak spot." Ghost trusted him to find it, and he did. With his plan, the bank's cameras would loop outdated footage, alarms would be disabled, and the motion sensors wouldn't detect a thing until it was too late. Mia, the driver, had her own job to do. She spent hours scouting the streets around the bank, driving every possible route. She timed the traffic lights, noted construction zones, and even followed the police patrol schedules. If something went wrong, and Ghost always planned for the worst, she had to know every escape route like the back of her hand. "We're ghosts," she told the team one night. "In and out before they even know we're there." Tank, the demolitions expert, focused on the vault. The bank boasted about its impenetrable security, but Tank saw it as a challenge. He tested explosives, calculating just the right amount needed to crack the vault open without bringing the entire building down. It wasn't just about power, it was about precision. "Too much, and we're buried alive," Tank explained. "Too little, and we're wasting time." He ran test after test until he was confident his plan would work. Zoe, the master of disguise, played a different role. She wasn't just blending in, she was the key to getting the team inside. Dressed as a bank employee, Zoe spent days watching the staff, studying their routines, and mimicking their behavior. She could copy the way they walked, talked, and even their handwriting. On the day of the heist, Zoe would be the one to get them through the front door without raising an eyebrow. Then there was Ghost. While his team focused on their individual tasks, he focused on the big picture. He studied the bank's floor plans, guard rotations, and even the surrounding neighborhood. Ghost anticipated every possible scenario. What if the guards noticed something? What if a civilian spotted them? What if the cops arrived early? He didn't just have one plan, he had backups for the backups. To Ghost, over-preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The team held regular meetings to go over every detail. They practiced their roles like actors rehearsing a play. Ghost insisted on running drills in a warehouse they rented for the purpose. They built a replica of the bank's floor plan and ran through every step of the heist. "No mistakes," Ghost told them. Not even one. The night of the robbery was carefully chosen. It had to be a night when the bank was full enough to have cash on hand, but quiet enough not to draw too much attention. They settled on a Thursday night, just after payday, when the vault would be loaded with deposits. Timing was everything. But Ghost knew that even the best plans could fall apart without communication. He invested in top-of-the-line earpieces, ensuring the team could stay in contact no matter what. If something changes, he told them, we adapt. No panicking, no improvising. We stick to the plan. They even planned for the aftermath. Ghost knew the police would respond quickly once the heist was discovered. That's where Mia's escape routes came into play. She had 3 different cars stashed in various locations around the city, each one clean and untraceable. The team would split up after the job, each heading to a safe house to lay low until the heat died down. The team wasn't just planning a robbery, they were orchestrating an event. Every detail was calculated, every possibility accounted for. They had rehearsed so many times that the plan felt like second nature. But there was still tension. Even with all their preparation, the risk was enormous. One mistake could mean prison, or worse. Ghost gathered the team one last time before the big night. He looked at each of them, his expression calm but serious. "We've done the work," he said. "We know the plan. All that's left is to execute it. No hesitation, no fear. We walk in, do the job, and walk out like we were never there." For the first time, the room was silent. No jokes from Tank, no snarky comments from Ace. Just focus. They knew what was at stake, and they knew they were ready. As the clock ticked down to the heist, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another job. It was the culmination of weeks of planning, practice, and precision. And if everything went according to plan, it would be the kind of robbery people would talk about for years to come. The night had finally arrived. The streets outside the bank were quiet, just as Ghost had predicted. It was late enough that most people were at home, but not so late that the streets would be completely empty. This was all part of the plan, blending in without drawing attention. For Ghost and his team, it wasn't just another night, it was the culmination of weeks of preparation, every second of which now had to count. Zoe was the first to move. Disguised as a bank employee, she walked through the front entrance with calm confidence. Her uniform was flawless, her ID badge an exact replica. No one gave her a second glance as she casually swiped her card at the security door and held it open for a repair crew. That crew was Ghost, Tank, and Ace, each dressed in coveralls and carrying toolkits. Mia stayed in the getaway car, parked a block away, engine running and eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. Inside, the team moved quickly. Ace went straight to the security room. With a few keystrokes, he looped the camera feeds, making it look like everything was normal. "We're clear," he said into his earpiece. Ghost gave a quick nod, and they moved to the next phase. Tank headed to the vault, his toolkit loaded with precisely calibrated explosives. He worked methodically, placing the charges exactly where they needed to be. 5 minutes, Tank said, his voice steady. It wasn't arrogance, it was experience. Ghost knew he could trust him to get it right. Meanwhile, Zoe played her role perfectly, walking the halls as if she belonged there. She kept an eye out for wandering guards, signaling the team whenever someone got too close. Her calm under pressure was unmatched, and it was clear why Ghost had chosen her. The tension grew as the clock ticked down. Ghost kept his focus, monitoring each team member's progress. Everything was going according to plan, but he knew better than to let his guard down. One mistake, one unexpected variable, could turn everything upside down. Finally, the moment came. Tank's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Charges set. 3, 2, 1. A muffled explosion shook the building, and the vault door swung open. The sound was quiet enough not to alert anyone outside, but powerful enough to breach the bank's most secure area. Ghost and Tank moved in quickly, stuffing bags with cash. They worked fast, knowing every second counted. Just as they were finishing, Ace's voice broke through the earpiece. "We've got a problem. Security's running a routine check on the camera feeds. They might notice the loop." Ghost didn't panic. "How long do we have?" he asked. 2 minutes, tops," Ace replied. Ghost signaled the team to wrap it up. They grabbed as much as they could carry and prepared to move. As they exited the vault, Zoe joined them, leading the way to the exit. Everything was smooth until a guard turned the corner unexpectedly. For a split second, everyone froze. Then Zoe stepped forward, her disguise and quick thinking saving the day. "Maintenance crew," she said casually, holding up a fake work order. The guard hesitated but nodded, walking away without a second glance. Outside, Mia was ready. The team piled into the car and she took off, driving with precision and purpose. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but Mia's pre-planned routes ensured they stayed one step ahead. She took sharp turns, switched lanes unpredictably, and eventually led them to one of the hidden safe houses. By the time the cops reached the area, the team was already gone, leaving behind nothing but confusion. Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was electric. They had pulled it off. The bags of cash were proof of their success, but for Ghost, the real victory was in the execution. No one was hurt, no evidence left behind, and no mistakes made. It was everything he'd planned for and more. But Ghost wasn't celebrating just yet. "We did good," he said, looking at his team. "But it's not over. Lay low, stick to the plan, and don't get comfortable. They'll be looking for us." His words were a reminder that while the heist was a success, the real challenge was staying free. For now, though, they had done the impossible. They had robbed one of the most secure banks in California and escaped without a trace. The morning after the heist, the scene outside the bank was chaotic. Yellow tape surrounded the building, reporters swarmed for details, and officers moved in and out, trying to piece together what had happened. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The vault was empty, the security feeds were useless, and no fingerprints or footprints had been found. It was as if the robbers had vanished into thin air. Detective Carter was put in charge of the investigation. He was a seasoned officer, known for his determination, but even he couldn't hide his frustration. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, staring at the vault. "No one just walks in and out of a place like this without leaving a trace." The first thing Carter did was question the bank's staff. Each employee was interrogated about the events of the night before, but no one seemed to know anything. Zoe's disguise had worked perfectly. No one even remembered her being there. The guard who had crossed paths with the maintenance crew couldn't recall their faces. "They looked legit," he said, scratching his head. "Had the uniforms and everything." Carter moved on to the security footage, only to find it had been tampered with. The cameras showed hours of repeated loops, making it impossible to see who had entered or exited the building. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing," Carter said, shaking his head. "This wasn't some amateur job." Over the next few days, Carter's team combed through every inch of the bank, searching for anything the robbers might have missed. But the gang's meticulous planning had paid off. There was no DNA, no fibers, not even a tool mark to analyze. Frustration grew as lead after lead turned into a dead end. "We're dealing with professionals," Carter admitted to his captain after a week of fruitless searching. "They planned this down to the last second. It's like they knew every move we'd make before we even made it." Despite his efforts, Carter was running out of options. The media started calling the heist the perfect robbery, and pressure mounted on the police department to deliver results. Finally, after weeks of hitting a brick wall, the decision was made. The case would be handed over to the FBI. When the case was handed over to the FBI, it wasn't just a routine move. It was a sign that things had reached a dead end. The local police were out of options. The media was breathing down their necks, and the public wanted answers. That's when they called me in. I wasn't just another agent. My job was to take on the cases that others thought were impossible. I arrived at the precinct quietly. No big entrance, no unnecessary drama. I've learned that flashy entrances don't solve cases. Focus does. Detective Carter, the lead investigator, wasn't exactly thrilled to see me. He'd poured everything into this case, and now he was being told to step aside. But I wasn't there to step on toes. I was there to get results. "Walk me through everything," I said, pulling up a chair in their cramped, chaotic conference room. Carter didn't hold back. He laid out all the evidence, or, more accurately, the lack of it. There were no fingerprints, no useful footage, and no witnesses. The gang had left them with nothing. "It's like they're ghosts," Carter said, frustrated. I leaned back in my chair, taking it all in. "No one's perfect," I said. "They might look like ghosts, but they're human, and humans make mistakes. We just have to find them." The first thing I did was visit the bank myself. I've learned over the years that crime scenes can tell you more than reports ever will. The vault, the security room, the exits. Every corner of that building had a story to tell, and I was determined to hear it. The team had been thorough, but no one gets everything. "They're good," I told Carter, who grudgingly agreed to work with me. "But even the best slip up." Back at the field office, I dug into the case files. I requested access to traffic cameras around the bank, scanned cell tower pings, and even analyzed nearby parking lot activity. It was slow, frustrating work, but I've always been good at that. These criminals thought they were invisible, but I wasn't about to let them disappear. Carter watched me work, and after a few days, I noticed his attitude shift. At first, he didn't think I'd make a difference, but now, he was starting to trust me. "You've got this way of looking at things," he said one evening, as we pored over a timeline I'd built. "Stuff the rest of us miss." I shrugged. "It's not about talent, it's about persistence. They left something behind, we just haven't found it yet." Then came the break I'd been waiting for. A traffic camera near the bank had captured a blurry shot of a van leaving the scene. It wasn't much, but it was something. "This is the thread we pull," I told Carter. "It's not about what they did inside the bank. It's about where they went afterward." Piece by piece, I started building a picture. I knew the gang thought they were smarter than everyone else, but they underestimated how far I'd go to catch them. They might have planned the perfect crime, but no one stays invisible forever. And I wasn't about to let this case be the one that got away. After reviewing everything the local police had gathered, I knew one thing. These criminals were professionals. They'd left no fingerprints, no clear footage, no witnesses, and no trail. But I also knew something else. No plan is truly flawless. Somewhere they had made a mistake. My job was to find it. I started with the traffic camera footage. The blurry image of the van leaving the area was all we had, but it was a start. I combed through every camera along possible escape routes, tracing the van's movements. It wasn't easy. They had planned their getaway to avoid detection, but no one can hide from every camera. After hours of scanning, I found it, a brief moment where the van passed through an intersection. This angle gave me a partial license plate. Not much, but enough to narrow it down. Using that partial plate, I pulled records of vans registered in the area. It was a long list, but I worked through it methodically. Most of them were dead ends, rental companies, small businesses, and private owners with solid alibis. Then one stood out. A van registered under a fake name, purchased in cash just a few weeks before the robbery. It was a red flag, and I knew I was onto something. While I worked on the van, I also went back to the bank's security systems. Ace, the gang's hacker, had done an impressive job looping the footage, but I noticed something unusual. In one clip, there was a faint reflection in the corner of a monitor, just enough to show someone moving. It wasn't clear, but it told me two things. First, they had access to the security room, and second, they were confident enough to move around freely. That confidence would be their weakness. I kept digging, looking for connections between the van and the gang. Then I hit another lead. A parking garage near the bank had an entry log that matched the van's description. The timestamp was just hours before the heist. It wasn't direct evidence, but it gave me a timeline. These weren't random criminals. They had planned everything with precision, arriving early and staging their operation from the garage. Meanwhile, I started mapping out possible safe houses. Criminals like this don't disappear without a plan. They need places to regroup, stash their loot, and lay low. I cross-referenced recent property rentals with fake IDs and cash transactions. Most of them led nowhere, but one stood out: a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was rented a month before the robbery and hadn't been used since. The owner had no idea who the tenants were, only that they paid in cash and left no contact information. I visited the warehouse with Carter, who was growing more involved in the investigation. It was empty but not completely clean. In a corner, I found a scrap of paper, barely legible but enough to give me something. It was a coded note, likely a list of supplies or a timeline. I couldn't decode it immediately, but it told me one thing: they had been here. The deeper I dug, the clearer the gang's pattern became. They were careful, but their moves weren't random. Every step they took followed a logic, a system. By studying their actions, I could predict their next move. I started piecing together their network, tracking suppliers, equipment rentals, and anything else that could tie back to them. It wasn't just about finding clues. It was about understanding their mindset. These weren't impulsive criminals. They were planners, thinkers, people who believed they could outsmart anyone. But their confidence made them predictable. They had a system, and I was beginning to see it. By the end of the week, I had a clearer picture of who I was dealing with. The van, the warehouse, the timeline, it was all coming together. But I knew this wasn't the end. They weren't just sitting on their success. These criminals were bold, and bold people don't stop. They'd strike again. The only question was when and where. For now, I had my leads. It was time to set the trap. Just when I was starting to connect the dots, they struck again. This time, the target wasn't a bank, but a high-end jewelry mall in the heart of the city. The robbery was as precise as the first, and the result was the same. No witnesses, no usable evidence, and the thieves vanished without a trace. It was clear they weren't just about stealing money. They wanted to prove they could do it again, even with law enforcement watching. The robbery happened late at night when the mall was nearly empty. Security guards were caught off guard as the gang used a clever mix of distractions and technology. Zoe, their master of disguise, posed as a delivery person, gaining access to restricted areas without suspicion. Meanwhile, Ace, the hacker, disabled the mall's alarm system, cutting the power to the security cameras just long enough for the team to get in and out. Tank, their demolitions expert, didn't need explosives this time. Instead, he used specialized tools to crack open display cases silently, ensuring they left no trace of forced entry. Mia, their driver, was parked just outside, ready to whisk them away the moment the job was done. The entire operation lasted less than 15 minutes. By the time the guards realized something was wrong, the gang was gone, leaving behind empty display cases and a baffled security team. When I arrived at the scene, it felt eerily familiar. The same level of precision, the same lack of evidence, the same frustration among investigators. But this time I noticed something they hadn't accounted for. In their rush to leave, they overlooked a small detail, a piece of broken glass that had a faint smudge on it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to analyze for potential DNA or prints. I also started connecting their methods. The way they cut the power, the timing of their entry, the tools they used, all of it matched the pattern from the bank robbery. These weren't two separate crimes. They were the work of the same crew. It was their signature. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a challenge. They were taunting us, daring us to catch them. But now I had something I didn't before, a piece of evidence they'd missed. This wasn't just about finding them anymore. It was about proving that even the smartest criminals make mistakes. And I was going to find them. The jewelry mall robbery had left the city shaken, and the pressure on me to solve the case had never been higher. 2 high-profile heists, no arrests, and a trail that seemed to vanish every time I got close. But I wasn't about to give up. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was personal. These criminals thought they were untouchable, but I was determined to prove them wrong. The first sign of a breakthrough came from the smudge on the broken glass at the jewelry store. It was faint, almost unnoticeable, but enough to run a test. The lab confirmed it wasn't DNA, but a residue. Industrial adhesive often used in high-security lockpicking tools. It was a small detail, but it told me the gang was using custom-made equipment, something not easily bought off the shelf. This was a lead. I started digging into suppliers who dealt with these materials, cross-referencing purchase records and surveillance footage from hardware stores and specialized shops. Most transactions were dead ends, but one stood out. A small shipment of industrial adhesives delivered to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The same warehouse I'd already flagged during my earlier search. This wasn't just coincidence. It was their base. I revisited the warehouse with Carter, the detective who'd been working with me. It was empty, as I expected, but this time I approached it differently. Instead of focusing on what was inside, I looked for signs of recent activity around it. A nearby dumpster held torn packaging that matched the materials used in both robberies. Even more importantly, I found tire tracks in the dirt, a unique tread that wasn't standard for most vehicles. Back at the lab, I had the tracks analyzed. They matched a rare type of high-performance tire, something used by people who needed speed and precision. It wasn't much, but it narrowed down the type of vehicles the gang could be using. Combined with the partial license plate I'd uncovered earlier, I was starting to piece together their movements. The real breakthrough, however, came from a source I didn't expect: Ace's handiwork. The hacker had been flawless so far, but when I analyzed the footage from the jewelry store's power grid, I noticed something unusual. There was a spike in activity at the exact moment the alarms were disabled. It wasn't enough to catch during the robbery, but it left behind a digital footprint. Tracing it led me to a series of proxy servers, but one of them pinged back to a location not far from the city center. With this information, I started mapping their network. It wasn't just about where they'd been. It was about where they were going next. By tracking purchases, digital activity, and the movements of their vehicle, I began to see a pattern. They weren't just hitting random targets. Their heists followed a calculated plan, each step building on the last. It wasn't just about the money. They were testing their limits, seeing how far they could push before getting caught. I shared my findings with Carter, who was finally starting to believe we could catch them. "They're good," he said, looking at the map I'd built. "But you're closing in." I nodded. "They've been careful, but they're getting bold. Bold leads to mistakes. We just need to catch them before they disappear for good." For the first time since I'd taken the case, I felt like I had the upper hand. The gang thought they were invisible, but their confidence was starting to crack. They'd left a trail, faint as it was, and I was following it straight to them. After weeks of frustration, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together. Every detail I'd uncovered, the adhesive residue, the tire tracks, the digital footprint from the jewelry mall robbery, was beginning to form a picture. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was enough to give me a direction. The gang wasn't as untouchable as they thought. The key to cracking their pattern was realizing that these weren't random hits. At first, the bank and jewelry store seemed like two unrelated targets, But the deeper I dug, the clearer their strategy became. Each heist wasn't just about the money or the goods. They were rehearsals, each building on the last. They were testing their skills, refining their methods, and figuring out how far they could push before anyone caught up. I started by revisiting the timeline. The bank robbery happened late at night, with heavy planning to disable alarms and security cameras. The jewelry mall was similar but had noticeable differences: less reliance on explosives, more use of precision tools. This shift told me something. They were evolving. They didn't just want to pull off big heists, they wanted to perfect their craft. The tire tracks from the warehouse were another piece of the puzzle. When I cross-referenced them with the vehicle from the blurry traffic footage near the bank, the tread patterns matched. That meant the same van had been used in both heists. By tracing the van's movements through additional cameras, I mapped out their likely escape routes. These routes always led to areas outside the city, where tracking them became nearly impossible. But one route stood out. It passed through an industrial zone with limited surveillance. The industrial zone became my focus. I started looking into recent activity there. Rented properties, unexplained power surges, even utility bills that didn't match the expected usage for vacant lots. One building stood out, an old factory rented under a fake name, paid for in cash, and registered to someone who didn't seem to exist. It wasn't much, but it fit their pattern perfectly. Inside the factory, they'd made a critical mistake. While the place had been cleared out, they left behind a discarded tool, a specialized cutting device used in both robberies. This wasn't just any tool, it was custom-made, something not easily replaceable. I traced it back to a supplier who remembered selling it to a man matching Tank's description. It was the first physical connection tying them to their crimes. Meanwhile, I continued analyzing the hacker's digital trail. The spike in the jewelry mall's power grid led me to a proxy server, but I dug deeper. After days of chasing signals, I traced the server's origin to a specific apartment complex in the city. It was a small, run-down place, the kind of spot where people didn't ask questions. The landlord was hesitant to talk, but after some pressure, he admitted renting to a man who paid in cash and kept to himself. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Piece by piece, the network started coming together. The gang's movements, their methods, even their mistakes, they were all connected. They weren't just a group of criminals. They were a machine, each part working in sync. But like any machine, they had weak points, and I was finding them. I shared the findings with Carter, who had gone from skeptical to fully invested in the case. "They're slipping," he said, looking at the map I'd pinned to the wall. It showed every known location they'd hit, every lead we'd tracked. "They're getting comfortable," I replied. "Comfortable means careless. Careless means we catch them." One of the biggest clues came from a delivery log tied to the warehouse. A series of packages had been delivered there, all under fake names, but one address stood out. It was another warehouse in a neighboring city. This time I didn't wait. I sent a team to monitor it, setting up surveillance to track their movements. The gang thought they'd covered their tracks, but they underestimated how closely I was watching. Every piece of evidence was a step closer to understanding their plan, and more importantly, stopping it. I wasn't just connecting dots. I was closing in. By now, the gang's pattern was clear. Their hits weren't random. Each target was chosen with precision. They moved quickly, executed flawlessly, and left no loose ends. But their confidence was starting to show cracks. They'd made small mistakes, ones they probably thought didn't matter. That was their first miscalculation. Their second would be underestimating me. After weeks of piecing together their movements, I finally had something solid. A new warehouse they'd rented just outside the city. It was tucked away in an industrial zone, perfect for staying off the radar. They thought it was safe, but I had it under surveillance before they even moved in. Cameras, undercover agents, and plainclothes officers were all in place. I wasn't going to let them slip through this time. The gang didn't know it, but every delivery they received, every time they came and went from that warehouse, I was watching. They were careful, but their overconfidence was starting to show. I noticed patterns, specific times when they gathered, consistent routines that hinted at planning. It wasn't long before I figured out what they were doing. They weren't hiding. They were preparing for their next heist. This time, the target was a luxury art auction happening in the city. High profile, high security, and loaded with valuable pieces worth millions. It was exactly the kind of challenge they couldn't resist. My job was to make sure it would also be their last. I didn't just want to catch them. I wanted to corner them in a way they couldn't escape. The trap had to be perfect, precise, just like their heists. I worked with Carter and a select group of trusted agents to lay it out. First, we leaked information about the auction's security details. It was just enough to make them think they had an inside track. Next, we tightened security in ways they wouldn't expect. Plainclothes officers disguised as staff, extra patrols in the area, and surveillance cameras placed where they wouldn't look. But the real trick was in the timing. The gang relied on split-second execution, and I wanted to use that against them. I planned to let them think they were succeeding, only to strike when they were too deep to back out. We rehearsed every move, every contingency. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The night of the auction, the atmosphere was tense. The event was packed with wealthy guests and priceless art, the perfect setting for their next big hit. My team was in place, scattered throughout the building, watching every entrance, every exit. We knew they'd come, but we didn't know when. All we could do was wait. Then, just after midnight, they made their move. Zoe, in one of her disguises, blended in effortlessly with the staff, giving the rest of the team access to the restricted areas. Ace hacked into the building's security system, looping the cameras to cover their movements. Tank and Ghost moved in to secure the loot, while Mia waited outside in the getaway car. It all looked smooth, too smooth. They moved like they always did, confident and precise. But this time they didn't know they were walking into a trap. As soon as they breached the vault where the most valuable pieces were kept, we made our move. The building's power cut out, plunging everything into darkness. It wasn't their doing. It was ours. Panic set in as they realized something was wrong. They tried to escape, but every exit was covered. Officers moved in from all sides, blocking their routes and cornering them in the building. Ghost tried to take control, barking orders to his team, but it was too late. The trap had been sprung. The moment was chaotic, shouting, confusion, and a brief chase through the halls. But one by one they were caught. Zoe tried to slip away in the crowd, but was spotted by one of the undercover agents. Tank surrendered when he realized the odds. Ace's attempts to cover their tracks were useless now, and Mia was caught before she could even start the car. Finally, Ghost stood alone, cornered and out of options. He looked at me with a mix of frustration and grudging respect. "Not bad," he said quietly before surrendering. The trap had worked. The gang that thought they were untouchable was finally behind bars. It wasn't just a win. It was justice. And as they were taken away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and I was there to make sure they paid the price. The night of the auction was supposed to be another flawless hit for the gang. They had every detail planned, every move rehearsed. What they didn't know was that we had been watching them the entire time. Every step they took, every decision they made, it was leading them straight into the trap. The first sign of trouble for them came when Zoe slipped into the auction, disguised as an event coordinator. She was calm and collected, as always, but I could see the subtle tension in her movements from the surveillance feed. She didn't realize that half the staff at the auction were undercover agents, including the security team she was trying to manipulate. Ace, the hacker, had been monitoring the building's systems remotely. He thought he was in control, looping the cameras and cutting off alarms, just like he'd done during their previous heists. But this time the feeds weren't showing the real picture. What he thought was an empty hallway was actually crawling with agents in plainclothes, waiting for the signal to move. Tank and Ghost arrived shortly after, entering through a side door Zoe had unlocked for them. Tank carried his usual toolkit, confident he could handle whatever obstacles the auction's vault might present. Ghost stayed calm, surveying the scene and coordinating their movements. He didn't know that every word he said into their comms was being intercepted by us. Outside, Mia was in the getaway car, parked a block away in a quiet alley. She kept the engine running, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. She didn't notice the plain white van parked 2 cars behind her, filled with agents waiting to cut off her escape. As they moved deeper into the building, the gang believed everything was going according to plan. Zoe had cleared the path, Ace had disabled the alarms, and Tank was already working on the vault. But as soon as Tank breached the door, the lights went out. Total darkness. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of their confused voices. "Stay calm," Ghost said, trying to regain control. "Switch to night vision." What he didn't know was that the power outage wasn't his team's doing. It was ours. The lights came back on a second later, but now they were surrounded. Agents moved in from every corner, blocking every exit. "FBI," I shouted, stepping forward. "It's over." For a split second, Ghost hesitated. His eyes scanned the room, calculating his options. Then he barked orders to his team. "Move now," he yelled. "We stick to the plan." Chaos erupted as the gang tried to escape. Zoe blended into the crowd, hoping to slip past the agents unnoticed. Tank charged toward one of the exits, trying to clear a path, while Ace frantically worked to regain control of the systems. Ghost stayed calm, directing his team like a commander on a battlefield, but they didn't stand a chance. Zoe was spotted almost immediately by one of the undercover agents, who recognized her from surveillance photos. She tried to talk her way out of it, but the agent wasn't buying it. Within seconds, she was in cuffs. Tank put up a fight, using his size and strength to push past the agents, blocking his way. But numbers weren't on his side. It took 3 agents to bring him down, but they managed to subdue him before he could reach the exit. Ace, in a last-ditch effort, tried to use his laptop to override the building's systems and create a distraction. But he didn't realize we had already isolated his connection. When he realized his tools weren't working, he panicked. 2 agents cornered him in the security room and took him into custody without much resistance. Outside, Mia realized something was wrong when she saw agents running toward her car. She floored the gas, trying to make a quick getaway, but the van behind her blocked her path. A short chase through the alley ended with her car cornered and her arrested. That left Ghost. He was still in the vault, surrounded but unshaken. When I walked in, he looked at me, his expression a mix of frustration and defiance. "You planned this well," he said, almost grudgingly, "but you still had to rely on luck." I shook my head. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You got sloppy and you underestimated us." He raised his hands slowly, surrendering without a fight. "Maybe," he said, a faint smirk on his face. "But it was fun while it lasted." As the agents took him away, the weight of the night hit me. Weeks of chasing leads, sleepless nights, and endless frustration had finally paid off. The gang that thought they were untouchable was behind bars, and their reign of perfectly planned heists was over. It wasn't just a win, it was a reminder that no matter how smart or careful criminals think they are, they always leave a trail. And as long as I'm on the case, I'll find it. With the gang in custody, the weight of the case finally began to lift. Ghost, Zoe, Ace, Tank, and Mia, all of them were behind bars, their so-called perfect crimes unraveling under the weight of the evidence we'd collected. The public, once shaken by their audacity, could now breathe a little easier knowing they wouldn't strike again. The stolen cash and jewels were recovered piece by piece as the gang's hideouts were searched. Every safe house, every stash location, it all tied back to their intricate operations. What once seemed flawless now looked like a web of arrogance and overconfidence. They'd thought they were untouchable, but every move they made left a trail they hadn't anticipated. Detective Carter, who had been skeptical when the case was handed over to me, finally gave credit where it was due. "You did it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know how, but you did it." "It wasn't just me," I replied. "They thought they were invisible, but no one is. Every mistake, no matter how small, adds up. It's just a matter of finding it." The press called it the takedown of the year. Headlines celebrated the capture of a gang that had terrorized the city's financial elite. But for me, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the chase, the satisfaction of proving that no matter how smart someone thinks they are, they can't outrun the truth. As I closed the file and prepared for the next case, I couldn't help but reflect on what the gang's leader, Ghost, had said to me during his arrest. It was fun while it lasted. Fun, maybe. But for me, it was another reminder that no crime is perfect. And as long as I'm on the case, no criminal stays free for long. No crime is ever truly perfect, and no criminal is ever untouchable. This case was a reminder that even the smartest make mistakes, and it's those mistakes that lead to justice. With the gang behind bars, it's time to move on. Another case, another challenge. The hunt never stops.